Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the 30 Days of SPECTRE. Today we are going to be talking about Mr. White. My name's Tom Sears and I'm joined by my good buddy Chris Wright, which sounds a little bit like Mr. White, but it's not. It's Mr. Wright. How are you today, Chris?
Well, funnily enough, Tom, my gran and granddad were called Mr. and Mrs. White. So imagine that. I could have been Mr. White as well. How cool is that?
That would be cool. Did you ever call your granddad Mr. White or anything like that? Or was it just granddad?
It was generally granddad. Yeah. I remember calling him by his first name once just to see what it'd be like, and everyone laughed at me, so I didn't do that anymore.
Yeah, that doesn't tend to go down well, does it really?
No.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. So are you excited to talk about good old Jesper, who incidentally we met on the red carpet and got our photo with?
Oh, I was just about to say, probably even more so now that we met him and he was such a nice dude. Yeah. I think that's added to the occasion somewhat. But yeah, no, it's cool because we're not only talking about Mr. White in Spectre, but there's a little bit of backstory we can go through as well, and see what we think about that. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So I suppose before we get cracking to talk about actually what happens in Spectre regarding Mr. White, I suppose we should start with a little bit of Mr. White history, shouldn't we? And basically, he is the kind of glue that ties together the last four movies. Well, not really Skyfall, I suppose. Casino, Quantum, and Spectre. He's the glue that ties those together. Now, as soon as I heard he'd been cast, I was like, yes, because that is what I wanted to see. What I wanted to see was the previous movie. Okay, right. I'm full of things to say, and I'm trying to organize my thoughts, right? So, okay, we have Casino Royale. We go through this amazing film. It's an amazing film. Great story. And then we get this bit at the end where Bond's got his bollocks out. He's just been whipped. And then Le Chiffre is about to chop his knob and bollocks off. And then we hear this noise and the door opens. And who is it, Chris? It's Mr. White. He comes in. He's got a gun. And he says, knowing who to trust is more important to our organization than money, or something like that. That wasn't a direct quote, but you know what I'm saying. I'm halfway there. And bang, Mr. White shoots Le Chiffre. Like, oh, what is this organization? And then that's all you get. That's all you get. There's this organization. We're like, all right, okay, that sounds interesting. And then the film ends. You know, there's more that happens, obviously. The film ends. In a pretty good way, yeah. Next time we come back in Quantum of Solace, all of a sudden, you know, we start off, Mr. White's in the boot. It's time to get out. He gets Mr. White out after, of course, I've only jumped the best scene in the whole series when he shoots Mr. White in the leg. What a bell end. See, I was saying I had too many thoughts in my mind and I can't organise them. What am I doing? That's the best scene in the whole series of films is Mr. White, we need to talk. Boom. Bond, James Bond. Brilliant. Love it, right? Yes. So, right, organise my thoughts. Opening of Quantum of Solace, he's in the boot. It's time to get out. Then there's the little interrogation scene. We have people everywhere. Mitchell goes mental, starts shooting his gun. Big chase. Bond chases him all over the rooftops, Chris. And then there's that thing on the ropes where they have a little battle on the ropes. Bond shoots him. Down he comes. That's the end of him.
Poor guy.
Then we cut to another bit. M's going, who are these people, James? They said they have people everywhere. I didn't mean he was in the bloody room. And then all that's going on. And there's this huge build-up and we find out Quantum exists and it's this shadowy network of people. And then there's an amazing scene in the Opera House where he sees them all having their secret meeting, which is a fucking brilliant scene. I love that scene so hard and fast. So and then the film ends and then nothing happens in Skyfall. It's completely ignored. There's this geezer, Tim Haines, who's supposed to be the special envoy to the Prime Minister. Guy Haines, not Tim.
Guy Haines. Yeah.
And then, he's the special envoy to the Prime Minister and that's not mentioned. And then there's nothing mentioned in Skyfall. And then here we are with Spectre. And then we hear that Jesper Christensen has been cast in Spectre and it's like, yes, we're going to go back to that story. We're going to tie it all in with the new film. And I was very excited about it. I'm going to let you talk now.
I don't know if I can after all that. That was like amazing.
Thank you.
But no, it's great, isn't it? Because you just, some of these things, you know, that was a really interesting way that we kind of knew what was coming, didn't we, with Spectre, to a certain extent when we heard about that. And the trouble is, like, it's a bit strange, the whole Skyfall thing, and it wasn't mentioned, and we can talk about that later in relation to the whole sort of Spectre quantum thing. But yeah, no, I mean, Mr. White, he's just one of those enigmatic characters, isn't he, where you're not quite sure, you know, how much of a good guy or how much of a bad guy. And he was always the periphery to the main villain. And so it was an interesting sort of take, what we've seen of him so far. So pre-Spectre, I was kind of, what did you think we'd get from him? I thought he'd come back, obviously it'd tie in somewhere. Is it how you thought it would play out with how we get him in Spectre? Or?
More or less. I mean, I thought he would probably die in this one.
I suppose the teaser kind of gave that away.
Yeah, I mean, but pre-teaser, like as soon as we heard that he'd been cast, I thought, you know, that's probably going to be the end of the road for Mr. White.
Yeah.
But I was speculating on whether, because at the end of the day, that scene in Quantum, which is so good, that Opera House scene, it is so good. What I love about it is how Bond says, you know, you need to find a better place to meet. And they all panic and they'll get up and leave. And then obviously he gets his little camera out and he takes lots of photos of everybody. Mr. White, however, is too smart for that. He just sits there. He doesn't move. And I always thought to myself, now that is the cleverest man in that group, because he's knowing how to deal with that situation and he's not moving, not drawing attention to himself. And I thought that Mr. White would end up being number 2. For example, that's what I thought he would be.
That could have worked.
And he would essentially be Blofeld's right-hand man. Now, they haven't used the numbering system in this round of Spectre, so we don't. That could essentially have been it, because obviously he says, you know, he worked for Blofeld, but then obviously he sort of started to disagree with his methods and all that kind of stuff, and that's how he ended up. So I suppose that could have been implied in a way that that's what his role was. He was like Blofeld's right-hand man. But I think above all else, you could call back in this film to Vesper, you could call back to Dominic Green, you could call back to all of them. But the one key piece that you need to tie it all together is Mr. White, I think. So his is an essential role, I would say.
Definitely. And he was also, there's that added side to him through his daughter, obviously in Spectre, which creates a whole different side to his story, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it could have just been, you could have just seen him in his, you know, play it out as we see it in Spectre in the house. Vulcan comes to kill him, and there's no relation to anyone else. It's just him. He's gone, and you know, it still would have worked, but it wouldn't have had that nice link into Madeleine Swann. So it's kind of cool, because he almost becomes not an ally, definitely not an ally, but almost there's a respect and a little bit of appreciation between the two, isn't there? Obviously, we'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, no, I think it was an interesting way of doing it. Something else I'd like to discuss with you is how much of an association you think he had to Quantum and to Spectre, and how they might have differed.
Well, okay, so there's a little conversation I think we need to have before that, which is what was Quantum then? Do you think Quantum was its own group? Do you think it was because obviously they tie it in the film, you know, he says Le Chiffre, green, silver, Quantum, it's all related. So to me, Quantum would have been, you know, some higher ranking Spectre people, and in their own group of, like, their own subgroup of Spectre, one of the tentacles, if you will, of the Spectre group. What are you in agreement with that? What do you think about that?
No, I think that would exactly be it. And I think Dominic Green was ahead of Quantum. That's how I saw it. And Quantum was one of the, like you said, one of the tentacles of Spectre, and that was just one aspect. Maybe, I don't know, now that we know, now we've got Spectre and we've got Blofeld, whether we'd ever see another sort of tentacle, as it were, and another affiliate to that. As far as I see it, they're definitely not one and the same thing. But there's definitely, they're like a subsidiary or sort of a part of Spectre to a certain extent.
So I think, you know, with what sort of Quantum were doing, it was they were doing with a lot of kind of government level stuff, weren't they? They were like messing with the Bolivian water supply, General Medrano, and sort of installing puppet leaders and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like the quantum group was all about kind of political power in certain parts of the world. Or at least political influence in certain parts of the world. I feel like that's what their job was. Guy Haynes being the envoy to the Prime Minister and all that kind of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So what was your question again with how Mr. White relates to that?
Well, it doesn't need to be a question. We'll just go on from where we were. Like the Guy Haynes thing, it would have been nice if that was somehow polished, somehow.
Well, apparently there was an alternate ending, wasn't there, at the end of Quantum that they scrapped? That apparently was Bond confronting Guy Haynes, which I'd love to see that. I wonder whether we will ever see the light of day with that or not.
No. Well, it would be pretty good. But for me, how I look at it, I see Mr. White as a Spectre employee whose job is to oversee things. Yeah. And his job at that particular time was to oversee how Quantum was doing. So I don't see him as a part of Quantum. I see him as a member of Spectre, and Blofeld's like, right, you keep an eye out on the Quantum lot, see how they're doing, report back to me, let me know. So he sort of investigate. Obviously, he kept an eye on the Chiffre as well, and he was the one who was like went to the meeting. He, like you said, he knew not to run away like the others, and I think he was there to oversee Quantum, to see how they were doing, report back to Blofeld, and if they're not doing up to standard, let him know, and then send out the executioner to take him out. That's kind of how I saw it.
Like the area manager of Tesco's. Every so often, he'd come and inspect the store, make sure everything's up to par and it's all looking good and working as a well-oiled machine. Yeah, that's what I would say Mr. White was. All right, cool.
Do you think the same sort of thing, or do you think he was definitely a member of Quantum? Or
I would say he was like, because obviously it's him that comes in to kill the Chiffre. He's been sent to do that. I wouldn't so that would imply that he was perhaps like an enforcer of some sort or like an assassin, but he's not, you'd send Mr. Hinks to do that job, wouldn't you really? You would say he's the enforcer of Spectre. But yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think he's essentially somebody who keeps an eye on operations, makes sure it all goes to plan. So, in that regard, maybe he was number 2. He's going to be top 5 in Spectre. I would put. Yeah, he's got to be. Put Mr. White out there. Yeah,
definitely. So, what do we think of him within Spectre itself then?
I would say. We hear him referred to, don't we, as the Pale King. That's his little code name.
That's cool.
So, that's him mentioned in the pre-title sequence, Marco Sciarra. He's got to go and see the Pale King. And then the Spectre meeting is primarily, a catch-up. We've got, 100,000 prostitutes all put into position, blah, blah, blah. And, right, who's going to go sort out the Pale King? So he's high on the Spectre agenda,
Yeah, he is.
Which is interesting.
Why, though? Why?
Well, we don't get that much backstory, do we? But basically, Mr. White just kind of says, doesn't he, how he just started essentially disagreeing with his methods, like women and children and stuff, which implies obviously Blofeld's been killing women and children. So, I guess as a father of a girl, that must have sort of tweaked his sort of conscience a little bit, I guess.
But by that point, they'd already set in motion the methods of killing him, haven't they? With the thallium in the phone. So that's a strange one.
No, I don't think that's that. I think the thallium was like a recent thing, wasn't it? Doesn't he say something like 2 months ago or 2 weeks ago, I found thallium in my phone?
Yeah, but the Spectre meeting was more recent than that, wasn't it?
Yeah. But but in terms of them falling out, I imagine that was a long time ago.
No. So in which case they went to sort it out with the thallium to kill him because he's fallen out. But then at the meeting, they're like, right, we've got to take care of the Pale King. But they've already kind of addressed that. With the thing. So why do they definitely need to take him out?
I see what you're saying.
If they know he's going to die in a few weeks, sort of thing. Is it purely driven by a need to get rid of him ASAP in case he speaks to Bond or something, or what do you think?
I guess so. That is an interesting one. What could their motivations be there? So obviously they're going after Madeleine as well. then I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things like in the old gangster movies when they come in and they say, Mr. Poponi says hello, bang, and they want to send a message. Do you know what I mean? Maybe that's it. Maybe the thallium is the message, and then they're gonna send a man to go and put the bullet in his head, and it's just a particularly grisly death for him,
Oh, okay.
What do you think? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Give him a bit of torture first, and then take him out. I guess. Well, it's difficult because Blofeld wasn't aware of Bond being that close until the meeting, was he? But obviously Marco Sciarra was going to go and take out the Pale King. Prior to that, we hear that in the pre-titles. So they obviously wanted to get rid of him before they knew Bond was on the trail. So maybe it was just the fact that he could have talked to anyone, I suppose. Yeah. Not necessarily Bond. Maybe he just could have talked to anyone. The thallium, they probably just thought, well, that was the quickest way to set something in motion, and now we'll just finish him off, maybe. Something like that, I suppose. Yeah. But either which way, they wanted him out the picture, didn't they?
They certainly did, yeah. So we see Bond crossing the lake in Austria. Cool. It's a very spooky looking scene, isn't it? Now I remember reading something about that the filming there was a little bit interrupted in the sense that all that kind of mist and gloom kind of came on. I think originally they wanted it to not have any of the mist there, and it was just kind of essentially like a huge, amazing kind of backdrop. But I think they had to just go with what they did. Now, I don't know 100% if that's true, but that's something I have a vague memory of reading, that they just kind of had to go with it, and that's why it kind of looks so gloomy. It's just because they had bad weather.
I think that's better, though, because it creates the atmosphere of something impending about to happen. Yeah. If it was all beautiful vistas and everything, okay, it'd look nice, but it's not that sort of scene.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen. And I think they lucked out if that is the case, then, because it's better that way around.
Yeah, well, it certainly looks very gloomy and very sort of, like we said when we saw the teaser, it almost looks like a horror film, that sequence, doesn't it? Where he's going up to this old log cabin, and it's all sort of really gloomy. Now, just thinking about that, having just said that, I wonder how, whether that lends itself to the bad US reviews, in the sense that the trailer would give the impression that this is another very dark film. But it's not, So maybe that's the sort of maybe that's a disconnect that's contributing to it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so in he goes. He's in the house. He's got his woolly hat on, gun out, having a poke around, and we get some. Are they crows that kind of fly past him?
I think they are crows. Yeah.
Do we think that's a nod to John Glenn?
I think possibly, because John Glenn, he used a lot of pigeons, I think, wasn't he? Pigeons or doves or something like that. Was it doves? I think it was doves, actually, not pigeons.
Some sort of bird. Let's go with that.
Yes. Okay. Obviously, in pretty much all of his films, I think. So maybe it was something like that. Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, it's got to be a partial nod to it, I'm sure. But it's quite cool. And again, seeing that in the teaser looked really sort of like a horror film, didn't it?
Yeah.
Bond just sort of swerves his head as they fly past and gets the gun back on. It's quite cool, I think. I think being in Bond's position, you would, obviously Bond doesn't get scared, but in terms of that situation, I love the way he's going on this tiny little boat across a massive lake, this big house, it's all dark, gets in there. It's a good setting. I like it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So he's in there. It seems empty, and then
there's dust everywhere, isn't there?
There's dust everywhere, and we I spy the little camera with a little red light, sort of going away. And then obviously, as he's poking about, he notices a little bit of light on the floor coming in underneath the floorboards. He finds the little secret catch. Turns it, door opens, and he finds Mr. White's kind of panic room. He doesn't look like he's in good shape. He's got old dinners sitting down there from God knows how long ago, with all the TV showing all the world events and stuff. And there he is. So
he's got a drip as well, hasn't he? A drip.
He certainly does. Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Bond Mr. White meeting. So essentially, what we have across the chess table, which I thought was a nice little nod to Kronstein in
very much
in From Russia with Love. We have them sort of facing off against each other, and this is where we learn about Blofeld and well, not about Blofeld specifically, but kind of essentially the kind of hold that he has over people and all that kind of stuff. So what do you think about that exchange?
I mean, again, obviously we saw this in the teaser, but I love the bit where Bond's like, you know, I just came back from a meeting where they were talking about you, and he's like, oh, I'm flattered London's still talking about me. Well, your name was mentioned, sorry. I'm flattered London's still talking about me. And he's like, oh, it wasn't MI6. And then he just puts the ring and shows it to him. I think that's a great bit.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that in this particular scene, they're kind of working each other out, because obviously White still thinks Bond's there to kill him. He knows he's going to die, and obviously he says that himself, doesn't he? But Bond obviously wants to find out a bit more information.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I think it's a really cool scene. I think it plays out well, and yeah, no, it's good. I enjoy it.
And he only has what I believe will become one of the most iconic lines in the Bond series. Yeah. You're a kite dancing in a hurricane, Mr. Bond, which I think is great. That's a great line. That was a trailer moment, wasn't it? That was in the very first teaser. As was like this scene was the focus of the trailer, wasn't it? We're pushing the ring across the chessboard and all that kind of stuff. So we have basically, this is where we learn that he's only got a few weeks left to live. We find out that he's protecting his daughter. Bond has a hunch he's protecting somebody. And there we have that, and he tells Bond about L'Americain, which will provide some answers. So he's like, do you
Bond's
think?
Like, where is he? He's everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good one as well.
He's eating dinner with your lovers.
He's eating dinner with your mum. He's on the phone with your dad.
He's in bed with your lover.
Yeah.
He's kissing your children. He's everywhere.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. And then yeah, so we get the bit of the backstory filled in of, you know, he fell out with Blofeld, obviously, or still Oberhauser at this point, obviously.
Yeah.
And then he tells him about L'Americain, which will provide him some answers. And so that is a funny one, because we find out that L'Americain is a place. And do you think Mr. White should have said, by the way, I've got a secret room in there. Punch a hole in the wall and you'll find it.
What if he knows Spectre's going to come to his hut and hear the recording, or could be bugged?
That's a good point.
His place.
Yes.
What, you know, maybe it's a lot safer if only Bond knows, you know, and if he told him everything there, Spectre could...
That is a very good point. You've done that well, because obviously he's got the camera there. Obviously Spectre were listening in because they had the footage of it later. So, yeah.
Well, they might have picked that up when Hinks went to kill him. He might have picked up the footage then.
There you go.
But they still could have been listening in somehow.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. So there's that. So in a sense, yes, by keeping it cryptic, that was a good logical move, because obviously L'Americain is just this random word, and he needs to go to Madeline to find out what that means, and then obviously they can go there. So yeah, that is actually good. Yeah.
Also, I think it's a good test, because if Bond, you know, if he tells him everything, then I don't know. I think it is a good inroad then for him with Madeline if he just says that word. Because if he's like, "Oh, Madeline, your dad's told me about this, and this," and Madeline's like, "Well, no, I've been there before. It's not, you know." She might be put off, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think? Maybe.
No, I think that works well. That's something I've seen on the forums of people saying, "Why didn't he just tell him there was a secret room?" And that did make me go, actually, that's a good point. But you've just solved that. So yeah, that works. That works out well. I like that. That's good. That's a good point.
And he mentions obviously his daughters to check out the Hoffler clinic. She's probably in there.
Yeah. So that tells Bond where to go, and we get the iconic line, "Kite dancing in a hurricane." And then, interestingly enough, I like that little exchange where Bond basically puts the gun on the chess table and
"This is my word."
Yeah, this is my word, so you can trust me. Turns the gun around, slides it across the table, which is a little callback to the Octopussy book, isn't there? Because basically, I haven't read this in a while. I should have read it before I saw the film, but basically the story of that with Hans Oberhauser, isn't it, is whereby there was some stolen Nazi gold, and Hans Oberhauser was shot in the back of the head, and he was frozen up some mountain somewhere, and then years later he thawed out, and they discovered it was a murder. And it was Dexter Smythe, wasn't it, who was in Jamaica that Bond has.
Dad.
Yeah. So Octopus's dad. Dexter Smythe is in Jamaica, I believe it was, and Bond has to go there to like essentially bring him in. And there's that whole scene where he basically gives him the gun and says, "You can shoot yourself," basically. Or again, that's a vague memory of the story. It might be a touch different, but it ends up with Dexter Smythe sitting there, being given a gun, saying, "Look, you've basically got to sort yourself out." And then you hear the gunshot, and he's killed himself, obviously. So this is a nice little nod to that story. Yeah,
that's good. I like it. Nice link.
Yeah, there. Absolutely.
Nice one. And the actual way that he does it as well is quite good, because he takes Bond's gun, points it at Bond, and he's watching for Bond's reaction. And Bond just is as cool as a cucumber, doesn't do anything, knows that he could be shot. But the fact that he knows that White realises that Bond will be able to protect his daughter. He finally sort of gets it, and then obviously mentions the line, and then shoots himself. And I love the way that it's silent. Do you know what? Quite a few things I like about this. Firstly, Bond doesn't watch it. When he knows what's going to happen, Bond turns his head. Yeah. So although he kills people, on a regular occurrence, he's not one that enjoys killing. No. He's not one that likes to watch people die. If someone's going to shoot themselves in front of Bond, he doesn't want to see it. So he purposefully looked away. Secondly, there's a silence after that. And then about 5 seconds into the silence, you just hear this drip. And then it's like drip. And then you just hear the blood splatter on the floor. And that is really cool. And then Bond obviously has to do his job. He sort of checks through him, doesn't he? He finds his wallet, chucks loads of stuff out, and then sees that photo of Mr. White and his daughter, and pockets it, and says his goodbye.
Absolutely,
saying goodbye. But
there it is,
so interesting. So what do we think about? Do you think that's tied up Mr. White's story well?
Absolutely, yeah. He always had to go because he was a bad cookie ever since the beginning. But he's a key character, man. He's the one that shoots Le Chiffre. Bond doesn't kill Le Chiffre. Mr. White does. That he's a part of that iconic scene at the end of Casino. On Lake Como. So that scene is just so brilliant. He's part of the pre-title sequence of Quantum and that whole thing. Obviously, he escapes and he's obviously a big player in that whole group. And then we needed a payoff, and it's. I think this is a great way to tie him up. There he is, alone in the middle of nowhere in some hut, log cabin styly, all on his own, can't go anywhere, and ends up taking his own life. So yeah, I think that's a good end to his story.
And then the crows come back and eat his eyeballs.
They certainly do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there we have it. What do you think about Mr. White's story? Do you think that was a fitting end for him?
Definitely. I was really happy with that aspect, actually. I'm glad he came back. The whole thing about, I literally had no idea prior to watching the film for the first time about his link to Madeline Swan. That was a complete sort of, I just didn't know. I didn't hear any of the spoilers about it or anything. And I thought that was quite a cool little link, especially obviously because it then gelled their relationship later on in the film. But I think it was quite nice to see that little bit of respect between the two of them, and Bond sort of obviously offering his word and being loyal to that as well. I think is quite important, quite cool. But good on him. So much better than if the character had never returned again after Quantum. It would have been a bit crap, really.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a waste here.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool stuff. All right. Well, that about rounds out today's episode of 30 Days of Spectre. That's Mr. White in the bag. Obviously, we'll be back tomorrow. But before then, make sure you come and join us on Facebook. Just put James Bond Radio into the search box. Come follow us on Twitter, which is at James Bond Radio. Come to jamesbondradio.com and join in the conversation in the comments section. There's plenty of chit chat to be had over there. and come and obviously subscribe to us on YouTube as well. And last but not least, it would be great if you could come to our iTunes page, just put James Bond Radio into the iTunes store search and give us a lovely glowing 5-star review if you feel we deserve it, because that really helps us rank higher and all that kind of stuff. And if you use Stitcher or any of those other apps, if you could give us a lovely glowing rating on there as well, that would be lovely. So are we coming back tomorrow, or have we had enough, Chris?
Yeah, I reckon we should go on holiday for a bit.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. The weather's rubbish lately.
It is rubbish.
I reckon we should go and stay in Mr. White's cabin. What do you reckon?
Okay, sounds good. Yep. Probably a bit dirty.
Yeah, I hope they've tidied it
up.
At
the moment. Yeah, it might be a bit messy, but yeah, okay. I'll be up for that.
Good stuff. Okay, so James Bond Radio will return in the morning as per usual. Until then, I've been Tom Sears.
I've been Chris Wright.
And James Bond Radio will return first thing in the morning. We'll see you then.
Lovely. Can't wait.
Bye.
See you tomorrow, everyone. Bye.